I was 29 years old when the envelope arrived, a crisp October morning. The air smelled of wood smoke and dying leaves, a perfect day. I stood in my kitchen, coffee in hand, enjoying the quiet. Life was good. It had been 2 years, 3 months, and 16 days since I'd last spoken to my parents, Roland and Brenda. That silence had been the most peaceful period of my entire existence. Then I checked the mail. The envelope was thick, heavy, made of expensive cream-colored paper. You know the type. The kind that screams money and demands attention. Embossed in aggressive black lettering was the name of a law firm, Garrison Black Estate Planning and Family Law. My heart did an uncomfortable flutter. For a split second, a dark thought crossed my mind. Maybe someone had died. Maybe Roland or Brenda had finally passed, and this was a notification about a will I was surely written out of. I set my coffee down, grabbed a butter knife, and sliced it open. Inside was a single, neatly stapled document, 12 pages long. The cover letter was addressed to me, Nadia Henderson. It stated, in cold, sterile legal jargon, that it had been sent on behalf of their clients, Roland and Brenda Henderson, my parents. I leaned against the kitchen island, a sudden chill running through me, and started reading. By the third page, a strange sound escaped my throat, a sharp, disbelieving scoff. By the fifth, my hands were shaking, not from fear, but from the sheer, unadulterated absurdity of what I was reading. By the time I reached the final page, my legs actually gave out. I slid down the kitchen cabinets, sat on the cold tile floor, and started laughing. I laughed so hard my lungs burned, until tears streamed down my face and my cats ran into the living room, terrified. It was an invoice. My parents, through a highly paid attorney, had sent me an itemized bill for the cost of raising me. They were formally demanding that I repay them $47,012. The document broke down my entire childhood into line items. It was staggering. Charges for diapers, infant formula from 29 years ago, school supplies, winter coats, medical copays. They even itemized my braces, listing $2 to $500 with a note about how ungrateful I was about wearing my retainer. A charge of $450 for a glass window I accidentally broke with a baseball in the summer of 2004. They had literally calculated a portion of their monthly mortgage and utility bills and allocated it to my childhood bedroom. It was madness. The most unhinged, deeply psychotic piece of paper I had ever held. And they expected me to pay it within 60 days or face further legal action. Sitting there, wiping tears of hysterical laughter from my cheeks, I realized I shouldn't have been surprised. This was Roland and Brenda down to their very core. Everything with them was a transaction. Everything had a price tag, and every ounce of affection had to be bought, earned, or leveraged. I grew up in a pristine, wealthy suburb outside Philadelphia. My father, Roland, was a high-level regional director for a massive pharmaceutical company. My mother, Brenda, worked part-time managing a luxury dental practice, though she treated it more like a social club. We lived in a sprawling 4-bedroom house with a manicured lawn, a 2-car garage, and a tall wooden fence that kept the neighbors out and our secrets in. The house was always immaculate, the lawn perfectly mowed. Appearances were the only currency my parents truly valued, and in the economy of our household, I was utterly bankrupt from day one. Because Roland and Brenda had 2 children, and I was not the golden one. That title belonged to my older brother, Julian. Julian was the favorite. It wasn't a secret. It was a foundational fact of our family dynamic. He was the favorite investment. He played varsity sports, got a business degree from a big state university, and went into corporate sales just like our father. Roland constantly referred to Julian as his legacy. Brenda called him her pride and joy, her perfect boy. And then there was me, Nadia. The backup child, the spare part, the one who existed merely to make Julian look better by comparison, or to absorb whatever negative energy my parents needed to expel after a long day of pretending to be perfect. The pattern established itself so early that I cannot remember a time before it. When I was in 5th grade, I worked my heart out and won 2nd place in the entire district spelling bee. It was a huge deal for me. I came home clutching a fancy certificate and a small, shiny plastic trophy, practically vibrating with excitement. My parents were hosting a dinner party that evening for Roland's colleagues. I ran into the living room and proudly showed them the trophy. Roland barely paused his conversation, glanced at it, and asked with genuine confusion why I hadn't won 1st place. Brenda quickly intervened, muttering that 2nd place was nice, but it absolutely did not belong in the formal living room. She took it from my hands. It went into a dusty cardboard box in the garage that very same night. I never saw it again. A few months later, Julian managed to barely make the roster for the middle school junior varsity football team. He wasn't even a starter, but the reaction was explosive. My parents threw him a massive celebration dinner. They invited the entire neighborhood. They ordered a giant, expensive sheet cake from a high-end bakery with the words "Future Champion" written in thick blue icing. I remember sitting at the very end of the long dining table, watching the adults toast to Julian, listening to the clinking of glasses. I ate my small slice of cake in complete silence, feeling like a ghost haunting my own home. That was the reality of growing up as Nadia. Everything I did was a disappointment, and everything Julian did was a triumph. If childhood was a lesson in being invisible, high school was a masterclass. I stopped trying to win their approval through sports or things they cared about, and I poured myself into things I actually loved. I joined the debate team. It turned out I was incredibly good at it. I loved the structure, the logic, the feeling of building an airtight argument and watching an opponent fold. By my junior year, I had won 3 major regional tournaments. I was carrying the team. My parents never attended a single competition, not one. When I asked them to come, they would wave a hand dismissively and say that debate was not a real sport. So there was no point in sitting in a stuffy auditorium all day. Julian, on the other hand, played varsity football. He was mediocre at best, warming the bench most of the season. Yet my parents attended every single game. They bought expensive Booster Club sweatshirts with his name embroidered on the back. They hosted elaborate tailgate parties in the school parking lot before every kickoff, serving catered food from local restaurants. The most defining moment of my teenage years happened during the state debate finals. I had asked them, begged them to come. My team was favored to win the championship, and I was the lead speaker. It was a huge deal. My parents, of course, had other plans. Julian had a minor sprain from football practice, and they insisted on staying home to nurse him. I remember standing on that stage, looking out at the rows of proud parents and feeling a profound, aching emptiness. We won the state championship, but it felt hollow. I left for college as soon as I could, choosing a small university across the country, far from their suffocating presence. The distance was a balm. I thrived. I made real friends and people who truly saw me for the first time. I found a passion for social justice and worked tirelessly at a nonprofit dedicated to helping at-risk youth. For the first time, I felt like I was building a life that was truly mine. The no-contact period began after a particularly nasty phone call on my 27th birthday. My mother called, not to wish me well, but to complain that I hadn't sent Julian a proper gift for his recent promotion. She ended the call by saying, "You know, Nadia, sometimes I wonder why we even bothered with you. You're such a disappointment." That was it. I hung up, blocked their numbers, and never looked back. The silence that followed was a gift, until the invoice. I called my best friend Tara first. She listened, aghast, then burst out laughing. "Your parents are truly levels insane, Nadia," she said. "This is a new low, even for them." She immediately recommended her cousin Valerie, a family law attorney known for her aggressive, no-nonsense approach. Valerie was exactly what I needed. She was sharp, impeccably dressed, and had a gaze that could cut through steel. I laid the invoice on her polished desk. She picked it up, flipped through the pages, and a slow, terrifying smile spread across her face. "This," she said, "is a work of art. A deeply deranged, legally meaningless work of art." "Why did they send it?" I asked, still reeling from the shock. "My father's lawyer isn't stupid. It's not about the law, Nadia," Valerie explained, leaning forward. "It's about intimidation. It's about control. Your father found an attorney, willing to draft a scary-looking demand letter on fancy letterhead, likely hoping that you would panic. They want you to feel small. They want to bully you into contacting them, into begging for forgiveness, or at the very least, they want to punish you for cutting them off." She tapped a manicured finger against the invoice. "This is an act of emotional terrorism wrapped in legal formatting. The question now is, what outcome do you want? Do you want me to just throw it in the shredder, or do you want to send a message?" I didn't hesitate. I looked Valerie dead in the eyes. "I want to send a message. I want to make it brutally, explicitly clear that I will not be intimidated by them ever again. I want them to feel exactly as embarrassed and small as they tried to make me feel." Valerie smiled. It was a terrifying, brilliant smile. "I love a client who knows exactly what she wants. Let's draft a response." We spent the next hour crafting the counterstrike. Valerie's letter was a masterpiece of professional devastation. It was concise, aggressively formal, and dripped with legal condescension. She formally thanked the attorney at Garrison Black for his crazily unorthodox and legally frivolous correspondence. She explicitly outlined that parental obligations were a matter of state law, not a contractual loan agreement. But the final paragraph was the kill shot. Valerie wrote on official firm letterhead that if Roland and Brenda Henderson attempted to pursue this baseless extortion any further, I would immediately file a massive counter-suit against them for harassment, intentional infliction of emotional distress, and frivolous litigation. She closed the letter by formally advising the opposing attorney to counsel his clients to seek intense psychiatric evaluation and family therapy, rather than further legal remedies, as their demands were clearly indicative of a severe detachment from reality. Valerie printed it out, signed it with a flourish, and sent it via certified trackable overnight mail directly to my father's lawyer. 2 days later, I received the delivery confirmation. The trap was set. All I had to do was wait for the explosion. For 3 entire weeks, there was absolutely nothing but deafening silence. Every time I walked to my mailbox, a small part of me expected to find another insane legal threat. Every time my phone buzzed, my heart did a tiny, uncomfortable jump. But the days just kept passing. The leaves outside my window turned from bright orange to a dead, crumbling brown. I went to work. I fed my cats. I drank my coffee. The world kept spinning. Then on a random Tuesday evening while I was cooking pasta, my cell phone rang. The caller ID displayed a number I didn't have saved in my contacts, but the area code was unmistakable. It was from the wealthy suburb outside Philadelphia where I grew up. I stared at the glowing screen for a long time. I knew who it was. I wiped my hands on a dish towel, took a deep breath to steady my racing pulse, and answered the call. "Hello," I said, keeping my voice completely flat and devoid of emotion. "What is wrong with you?" It was Julian. It was Julian. He didn't ask how I was doing. His voice came through the speaker, tight, aggressive, and laced with absolute panic. It was the voice of a golden child who had just realized the world didn't actually revolve around his parents' delusions. "Good evening, Julian," I replied smoothly, picking up a wooden spoon and stirring my pasta sauce. "It has been 2 years. To what do I owe this incredibly warm greeting?" Julian let out a frustrated growl. He told me that our parents were furious. He said that Mom had been crying for 3 days straight, and Dad was screaming at anyone who walked past his home office. He accused me of humiliating them. He said that the letter my lawyer sent had embarrassed our father in front of his favorite corporate attorney at Garrison Black, and that it was a cruel, vindictive thing to do to my own family. I actually chuckled. It was a genuine, relaxed sound. I humiliated them? "Julian, they sent me a legal invoice for the diapers I soiled when I was 10 months old. I think they did a pretty fantastic job of humiliating themselves, without any help from me." Julian started stammering, suddenly defensive. He said that I was completely misunderstanding the situation. He tried to spin it, claiming that the invoice was just their way of making a point. He said they were deeply hurt by my absence. He told me that Mom and Dad just felt incredibly unappreciated for all the sacrifices they had made to raise me, and the bill was just a symbolic gesture to show me how much they had invested in my life. I stopped stirring the sauce. I leaned against the kitchen counter, my grip tightening on the phone. "A symbolic gesture?" I echoed, my voice dropping an octave. "They threatened to take me to court for $47,000 because they felt unappreciated." Do you actually hear the words coming out of your mouth, Julian? Or is the brainwashing that severe? He told me I was being unnecessarily difficult. He said I always played the victim, and that I needed to grow up. Apologize for the terrible letter my lawyer sent, and try to repair the relationship before I ruin the family forever. "Let me ask you one simple question, Julian," I said, cutting through his rant. "When you and Fiona got married, when Dad paid for the 200-person rehearsal dinner, the open bar, and the flights to your honeymoon in the Maldives, did they send you an invoice for that? Did they threaten to sue you for the cost of your college tuition, your car, your first apartment?" There was a long silence on the other end, broken only by Julian's ragged breathing. He knew. He knew the answer. He knew how much they had poured into him, freely and without expectation of repayment, while every interaction with me was tallied, weighed, and judged. "Nadia, you're being unfair," he finally managed, his voice weaker. "They just want to talk. They're your parents. You owe them a conversation." "I don't owe you anything," I cut him off. "I am being healthy. Goodbye, Julian. Tell your parents to lose my number forever." I didn't wait for a response. I pulled the phone away from my ear and hit the red button. Immediately, I went into my phone settings and permanently blocked the number. I blocked the entire area code just to be safe. I set the phone face down on the table, took a deep breath, and let the quiet peace of my apartment wash over me. I never heard from Julian Rowland or Brenda ever again. Spring fully bloomed in Boston. The cherry blossoms exploded in pink across the city parks, and the freezing winds finally surrendered to the warm sunshine. My life began to accelerate in beautiful ways. I received a major promotion at the nonprofit, becoming the director of regional outreach, which came with a salary bump that finally matched my worth. I moved out of my tiny, drafty apartment and signed a lease on a gorgeous sun-drenched loft, with exposed brick walls and plenty of room for a real home office. I even went to the local shelter and adopted a second cat, a chaotic little orange tabby that immediately became best friends with my older cat. On a bright Sunday morning in late April, I decided to host a brunch to officially christen my new apartment. I pushed my dining table near the massive open windows to let the warm spring breeze drift through the room. I set the table with completely mismatched, colorful ceramic plates I had collected from various thrift stores over the years. I folded bright cloth napkins. I cooked a massive spread, fluffy pancakes, scrambled eggs with spinach, fresh fruit salad, and a huge pot of strong coffee. By 11, the apartment was filled with noise. Tara was sitting on the kitchen counter pouring mimosas and telling a hilarious, overly dramatic story about a disastrous first date she had gone on the night before. Valerie, who had quickly transitioned from my terrifying lawyer to a genuine friend, was laughing so hard she was wiping tears from her eyes, showing us photos from her recent hiking trip in the mountains. Two of my colleagues from the nonprofit were sitting on the sofa arguing playfully about which movie we were going to watch later. I stood by the kitchen island, holding the glass coffee pot, watching them. I refilled Tara's cup and then Valerie's. I looked around the room at these brilliant, funny, deeply supportive women. They knew my scars. They knew my history, and they chose to show up for me anyway. A profound realization hit me, settling deep into my bones. This was my family. Not the people who shared my DNA. Not the people who had raised me in a house of conditional love and constant comparisons. My family was right here. They were the people who had chosen me, just as I had chosen them. They were the people who saw my value, who celebrated my victories without resentment, and who would absolutely never, under any circumstances, send me a legally binding invoice for their affection. Later that afternoon, after the last mimosa was poured and everyone had finally gone home, I sat alone on my plush new couch. Both of my cats were curled up on my lap, purring softly. The apartment was quiet, smelling of coffee and fresh spring air. I thought about the ridiculous 12-page invoice. I thought about the beautiful, heartbreaking letter from Grandma Beatrice, who had quietly supported me through college. I thought about the scholarship fund I had recently established in her name, which was currently helping a terrified 19-year-old pay for their textbooks. The universe, I realized, has an incredibly sharp sense of humor and a very beautiful sense of justice. My parents had tried to bill me for the fundamental crime of being born, and in their absolute arrogance, they had handed me the exact key to my permanent freedom. If you are watching this video right now and you recognize yourself in this story, if you have ever been told that you owe an unpayable debt to people who gave you nothing but the bare legal minimum, if you have ever been billed emotionally or financially for love that should have been given freely, then hear this. You do not owe your parents repayment for raising you. You do not owe anyone access to your life, your energy, or your peace, especially if they have spent decades making you feel invisible. You are completely allowed to walk away from people who view you as a bad investment, rather than a daughter. You are allowed to build your own family from the ground up, picking the people who choose you back. Blood does not make someone family. Unconditional love does, mutual respect does, and invoices have absolutely no place in either. I never spoke to my parents again. I never needed to.